Surprise, surprise. I actually mentioned after the last video that I might come up with the, the remainder of some of the things that I'd been working on. And uh, as you all remember, and I'm sure um, I know I've gotten some phone calls even on uh, Eva's time in the sanitarium when she was there, working as a dietitian and then went to work in another government program. And if you you start checking some of the dates, um, and as far as what's going on, if whether there's a war going on or like the depression. So a lot of what she was facing and her family members um, were a lot about the depression, but also I think a lot of it was that her mother died when her mother was 29 years old, and she basically did not really. Um, I never found the chart notes, but I know that when in her obituary it said she had been sick for quite a while. So that's but I would think if you were young and you lost your mother, and then I did more research on her father, and he died young also. So you have to know about me that I'm very interested in. I've mentioned another time in enough times in my video. I would imagine you would kind of get the idea. I am interested in the chart notes and, um, what is it that is causing the deaths? And part of it is when I study DNA, and I think there is those genetic things that we have that dictate to a certain extent how long we're going to live and where we have the potential. And I know sometimes I go to the doctor and I say to the doctor, especially if it's a new doctor, I say like my grandfather on my father's side basically died of a stroke. My father died of a stroke, and his mother died of a stroke. Now, on the other side of the family, I don't see strokes, but it does give me the possibility to keep in mind that could be showing up for myself or for my other family members. Now, last night I happened to, I was doing genealogy, but I happened to, I have a dual monitor and a little laptop. And so I'll have one thing going on one screen and then I'll be working. So I was working on the genealogy to get this ready to be able to publish today. And it was a documentary that came on about the blue zone in the world. And so there's these spots in the blue zone where people are living to be over 100 years old. And so, of course, that distracted me, and I was, really paying attention to it. I'm very interested in, especially the diet of people. When you think about, especially DNA, like what I was just talking about, if you have the pre, you know, kind of a pre-idea that you might not eat so much salt or and don't get overweight and all the different things that we kind of hear of. But this guy who was doing this documentary took it like another step, and he went out and visited about four different areas that were considered blue zones. And it wasn't just the diet that was, allowing these people to live 100 years. There was exercise, but the exercise had nothing to do with going to the gym or anything that we think of in America as far as exercising. Their life just was built around either the villages had steps they had to go up and down, or the men would go out and tend to the sheep every day. Um, but they were very, very active all the time. They were always, they took a lot more time and effort in chopping wood or gathering all of the food that they did eat. And it was interesting that what they were eating and how that made a difference on them. But then the other part was the stress of living um, like where we live in the United States right now can be very, very stressful. I think we're inundated with sensationalism as far as other people's stress that we don't have any control over, but we're kind of seeing this on, and we have to kind of guard ourselves from that. But I had already started the little spreadsheet thing here because I was intrigued to take, especially when take this information. So when I been doing a lot of my genealogy, it's always amazing to me in the beginning, especially now, a lot of the people, because I'm on the West Coast, I grew up on the West Coast, and a lot of the people left farms and they went out there to work in mills. and have the job in the wood industry. And there was a difference immediately compared to how long these people lived. And I saw a lot of the people that were on farms really were living a lot longer. But this last episode with Eva was really interesting from the standpoint. Now, I don't know what her mother died of, and I'd be really, at some point, I hope to find that out, to die at 29 years old. But her father, Moses Everett Craddock, he ended up with lung cancer, but he died at 54. Now, that's pretty young. I mean, compared to when you think about all these people in the world that live to be over 100 years old, and they don't have dementia and they don't have depression. They take care of their elders, they take care of each other, they laugh a lot. They talked about that a lot. And all these people, they sing song and dance, and there's many facets that lead into this other kind of zone where our bodies are not being as beat up as they are here, especially right now. Coming out of the pandemic, I think there is so much isolation. I feel it myself, and I'm just not the type of person that would ever, you know, isolate myself, or, I'm a people person. I feel it. But then if you had that tendency, those people just, they're going to have to be really make a shift in order to get back to where they were. They may not want to leave their place, and especially the ones that can work from home now too. So it just isolates more and more. And what a lot of the documentary was saying was what's made a lot of difference when people care for each other, especially relatives. And in the United States right now, our relatives have a tendency to be scattered all over the place. Even to get together for an event is such a major airplane trip and hotel and restaurants, and this great expense put into something that in some of the smaller areas where it is a little bit different lifestyle. And it was a little bit more like even when I was growing up, where everybody kind of lives close. And so, yeah, you have a wedding, but you drive to town and you go across the street to the church, and then there's a big party afterwards, and everybody's dancing and singing, and it's just kind of interesting. So what I learned though from this genealogy aspect and the DNA aspect, was watching Eva go through like a really, really hard, stressful environment where, um, and both, even though she married Johnson, he he and her both kind of went their separate ways almost, in regards to, I'd find him in the timber camp, I'd find her, working in the sanitarium, the tuberculosis sanitarium. That was interesting. I got a call last night from my sister, and her husband, who was Air Force, had a positive reading on tuberculosis back in some of those earlier days. And all of a sudden, she kind of wondered, because now Eva was such a close person to our grandfather. And whenever my sister and her husband would come back to town, they would go to the nursing home and visit. So it was interesting. We figured out the dates, and it probably didn't have anything to do necessarily with Eva actually working in the sanitarium. But it was interesting because it triggers these memories with people. And again, it's like, for many, many years, I didn't have a relationship with my sister, but since the pandemic, I mean, we talk every day. And last night, you would have loved it because, oh my goodness, they live on a small farm, and they had like 30 chickens, and she was getting 30 eggs a day, and she was kind of between the price of the feed and selling the eggs, it was kind of taking a toll. They're both, one's 80 and one's 79. So they're up in years to that point, but they're very active. They belong to a church, so they have kind of a church community family that kind of support through some of this. But she said they were getting rid of some of their chickens. And so these two young guys came to get the chickens, and they had just a car. They didn't have a truck. And in the car, they had kind of an oversized dog crate, metal, like a metal thing. And so trying to catch these chickens and get them into that thing to put them in the backseat of the car. Let me tell you, we laughed and we laughed and we laughed. And to me, laughter relieves so much of my. I do have some health issues, and I mentioned before when I had polio as a little girl. I do have some of that still goes on. And but laughter is one of the things that if you could just find a pill and take a laugh pill. But I saw that, coming through this whole thing about the blue zone and living to be 100. It was being related to people that you care about, and having fun and laughing. So back to the thing with Eva. I mean, this was tough. This was a hard time for the United States. And, the deep depression of people, a lot of people were dying. They were so hungry. I mean, I have, seen some pictures and have read up on different things, and it's very hard to imagine. But I think both her and her husband, even though they weren't even together most of the time, now he came over from Bulgaria, and so I think his ethic, and he was a very hard worker and very responsible, very good looking. I saw a picture of him yesterday. Very nice looking man. And of course, Eva was a very pretty lady. And but they had these two kids. Well, it ended up that in the census reports, he had the Chris Johnson. He had the kids with him, but here's Eva up living in these situations, living in the sanitarium, doing the food for these people. And that was a horrendous health story, even for me. Like I retired out of OHSU, which is a large hospital in Oregon, and so I'm aware of a lot of the things that happened, and I covered a lot of the financial areas that were in the suburbs of Portland, and people who didn't want to live in the big city, but then to get doctors to go out and help and take care of them, that was a problem. So, I think things change, and but when the pandemic hit, I think it's changed everybody and everything that we knew, and I don't know when that will come back. I mean, it if I don't know if you just will eventually get used to the higher prices and the higher price of gas and people being a little more grumpy than usual, or if people will be able to have it. Actually, this morning on the news, I found out there's a new variant, and um, you know that could go on for a long, long time. And so I don't know if there'll be that timeout period where we all can regain our comfortableness of really relating to each other and shaking hands and giving each other a hug, or the things that I think we really need to be able to be totally healthy and live longer. So so her dad, Moses Everett, so here he lost his wife at 29, and he kept going, but he was trying to survive, and so gets married again. So I find this thing, and it says Ruth Jeanette Thornburg was her name. And so it shows in the census they got married, and, and she ended up having. I'm not laughing at what she had, and I'm not laughing, but she died. She was 22 years old. She had leukemia and then got pneumonia, and she died. So here's Moses out there again, by himself. Now then he died at 54 of cancer of the lung. Um, so it started to show. And so then um, Eva's brother, and I don't know a lot about him necessarily, but he did have congestive lungs and heart problems, and he died when he was 61. And her sister Guinevere, she died at 41. I mean, I've never seen such low numbers. Just, it was nice to put it in kind of a little Excel sheet so that I can kind of see those numbers and see. But then as a so this is kind of the phase two now. So, so Eva, she got married after Chris. They got divorced, and then she married who'd she married? Oh, Dudak, and I couldn't find there wasn't a whole lot about them or their relationship or even that time of it was night by then it was 1936. So I would think that a lot of the depression would have, been okay by then. But she didn't stay with him very long, and then she married Daniel Lightfoot, and I think they were married maybe 9 or 10 years, and then they divorced, and neither Dudak or Lightfoot, she didn't have any more kids. So basically, those two kids were, with Chris Johnson was kind of it. Now, what was interesting to me is I finally found her, though, married to a um, Raymond Levy Klaus, Plouse, not a name that I remember seeing. Now, he was up in the state of Washington, and of course, that's where and over the time, I mean, some of you that are new, you might want to go back and rewatch some of the videos because it does kind of follow along. So the Allnutt family had 11 kids, including my grandfather, who was the youngest. Now they would get together and they would kind of decide, okay, I think we're going to go all see, go see one of the sisters or brothers, and their age, was really pretty different when you think 11 years. I mean, 11 children, and there was one out of, and I see this in families, there's like one usually, especially in the large families, that is kind of like the mother hen almost. And so people would go to Laura, and I haven't written, a very extensive thing on Laura. Her husband was a cobbler, and he was in Ellensburg, Washington. And I remember going to the house. So we all went to the house. They had a basement, and I remember him making fishing ties. And I remember then him having this little store downtown where he was a cobbler. He fixed shoes. He, did leather belts and stuff like that. And so, but at one point, Eva was over there and she was visiting Laura. Now, which makes sense. I mean, with Laura was closer to her mother's age, and then Pearl was in that same age bracket. So she kind of, that's who she had. And then Grandpa Roy, who was the youngest, I have the wonderful picture of them kind of strutting down the streets of Seattle together. And he's with his cane and his, the industrial accident. He'd gotten his shoe fixed, but they just looked so happy and so connected. It was really nice. And so anyway, she was up there. She was up visiting, and I think that's where she met then this Raymond Plouse, and he was a little older than her, and he was a deputy sheriff up there. And it looked like they must have went back like to Montana, and I think that's where they got married. But then I think the whole thing, I think she must have had that opportunity where she was just able to be. They got very active in the little church where they were at, um, and then she died about a year before he did, and then he died after that. But as far as I could tell, there was a very, the usual things I'm looking for. I didn't see anything unusual in that period of time that would have, I think she probably was able to relax and not be so stressed and be in a relationship like that. Um, Now, it was interesting as I was doing this. So if I back up a little bit, so I was looking at this picture of my grandfather and her, and and I think I mentioned on the video, I was gonna check with my sister just to make sure that I didn't have that wrong. Now she's older than me, so a lot of times, she knows, and I know that there was another lady, Virginia, that was the same way with my grandfather, and she was connected to the Allnutts in Montana, and she would come out, and I think I've written a little bit about her, but I wanted to check with her. So before she had a chance to call me this horrendous story about the chickens last night, all of a sudden I realized that there was a this lovely picture, and it was something new to me too, and I really wanted to share this with you, especially for the ones of you who are doing a lot of research in ancestry especially. So when you have all your hints, and then there's this place where you can search. Well, it used to be the hints were always in one place and the search was in someplace else. And now, because there's so many more hints for you to follow, they actually have this other area in the search area where you can find really good stuff. So I found a couple chart notes, and I was very excited about those because I love to read them. And then I found this picture. Well, it was Eva actually when she was an older woman. And man, she was still a knockout, really a very attractive woman. and so then I made note of it, and it was this Karen Johnson that had submitted that picture. So then, my brain starts going, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna message this Karen and see where does she fit into the family, because for her to have that picture, and I don't have that picture, and nobody in the family that I've related to so far has that picture. So she's got to be related somewhere in that area of where I was, doing most of the research with the last two times that I've worked on Eva's story. So then it was interesting. Today I was kind of going back and filling in some of the spaces, and so one was that Eva and Chris Johnson, they had these two kids. So one was Helen, Virginia Helen, and one was Raymond Clyde Johnson. So I didn't have hardly anything on him, on either one of them. And so as I was looking and starting to do some um, further research, I realized I could see this Karen lady was attached to a family of the Long people. And so then again, so I sent her this message. I haven't heard from her recently. But then one of the things that we do, my brother and I would just pull our hair out over the years. So you get different, like, okay, so for instance, I was working with Raymond Clyde, and it shows on the census him as Raymond Clyde. But then but he really went by Clyde Raymond. And then he had this baby that they list as Raymond Clyde Johnson. So the whole thing, becomes this, you know, so you have to figure out. So I think I ended up with 3 different dates of birth for him. And so then you have to look at, which one are you going to trust? And so, but I have seen heirs, and I haven't talked about this for a while, but I think in the beginning when I started doing the videos, I mentioned how you can find these problems, and then you have to decide. But I have actually seen errors even on the tombstones. So you not necessarily can't necessarily count on that date, which I would think would be a lot of times if I have the military records. Now there was something related to the military, but it was so far-fetched. I don't think that it was anything to do with Clyde Ray. Now, Clyde Ray would have been Eva's son, and most of his records go by that. And the only big discrepancy I see is his date of birth, and it went between the day he was married and find a grave, and so both of those, and the marriage certificate records were printed so neat and orderly. I was impressed. A lot of times they'll make them all swirly and it's hard to read. But this was very, very, very nice cursive writing. And it said one birthday. And then when I went to the gravesite, it said another date. So sometimes I think that causes some of the people who are doing research, they may come up with the conclusion, well, I think my number is right. And my brother and I have, we challenge each other if we find some discrepancy, like, oh, okay, you have one date and I have another date. And so then we go backtrack and we look for the resource and see if that resource is in a valid area. Now, there's a lot of information you might get when you're researching in Ancestry, as far as may lean towards the possibility of heirs happening. But if if you see it on a marriage certificate and you're seeing it on the grave site and there's a discrepancy, who's going to be, it's going to be interesting to find out, which way that's going to go. So, but finding out that new place also to look, I like when I'm doing these videos because I can pass on to other people that are working in Ancestry. And I know other sites and other platforms, but I think for me, for the many years as I've been doing this now, I think that keeps me busy with a lot of what I'm looking for. And so anyway, I feel like I might have a little bit left over in my mind, a little bit about maybe, yeah. So the one question I have, and I might find this out because I think I'm gonna start working on the O'Malleys. So they come out of Craddock. Somehow the Craddocks married an O'Malley, and most of the O'Malleys, they were working the mines up in Montana, but then they came down to Denver, and I'm living in Denver. And that's one of the times I went to the cemetery looking for O'Malleys. Uh, so that's what I'm going to, start on next to see if I can fit find out how they fit into the whole family, especially since I'm living here. I don't know how much longer I'll be here because I'm kind of antsy to get on another adventure and be able to go, um, more visits, because I've been very isolated through all the videos for sure. I'm sitting in the same place with Mount St. Helens and, before it blew and but after it blew um and sometimes I wish I was out there someplace, traipsing around and that's very enjoyable to me. So other than that, if you have any questions, send me comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe and I'll see you next time.